Picture this. You're living in ancient Athens. You wake up every morning terrified. Terrified that you've offended a god you didn't even know you were supposed to worship. Terrified that when you die, you'll spend eternity as a miserable shade in the underworld. Terrified that no matter how hard you work, no matter how much you achieve, it will never be enough. You see lightning and you think, Zeus is angry. You get sick and you think, which god did I offend? Your child dies and you torture yourself wondering what cosmic punishment you're suffering. Every single day, fear. And into this world of grinding, suffocating anxiety walks a man who says something absolutely radical. What if you could be free? Not free someday. Not free in the afterlife. Free now. Free from the god's anger. Free from death's terror. Free from the endless treadmill of desire that never satisfies. This is Epicurus. And here's what's remarkable, what's absolutely astonishing about this philosopher. He didn't just talk about freedom. He didn't just theorize about happiness. He actually delivered. He built a community, the garden, where slaves philosophized alongside citizens, where women engaged in intellectual discourse as equals, where ordinary people, not geniuses, not aristocrats, just regular humans, achieved genuine tranquility through reason and friendship. And it worked. For 600 years, Epicurean communities flourished across the Mediterranean. People reported genuine transformation, freedom from anxiety, deeper happiness, more meaningful lives. Then Christianity came along and tried to destroy it all. They burned the books. They slandered the man. They turned Epicurean into a dirty word meaning self-indulgent hedonist. And for 1,000 years, this philosophy of liberation was almost lost. But here's the thing about truth. Real truth. Truth that actually helps people live better lives. It doesn't stay buried. In 1417, a manuscript hunter found a complete copy of Lucretius's poem explaining Epicurean philosophy, and it exploded across Renaissance Europe like a bomb. Thomas Jefferson called himself an Epicurean. Karl Marx wrote his dissertation on Epicurus. Modern psychology is rediscovering his insights about what actually makes people happy. And today, right now, we need Epicurus more than ever. Because look around. We're drowning in anxiety. We're chasing desires that never satisfy. We're isolated despite being connected. We're working ourselves to death for things we don't need. We're terrified of death, terrified of not having enough, terrified of missing out. We're living in a different world than ancient Athens, but we're suffering from the exact same disease, false beliefs creating unnecessary suffering. And Epicurus, this ancient philosopher who's been dead for 2,300 years, has the cure, not a theory, not a doctrine, not something to believe, a practice, a way of examining your life, understanding your desires, freeing yourself from irrational fears, and achieving genuine tranquility. And I'm going to show you how it works. Over the next hour, we're going to explore a philosophy so radical, so practical, so genuinely transformative that it threatened empires and survived millennia of suppression. We're going to see how atomic physics can free you from superstition, how understanding death can help you live more fully, how examining your desires can bring deeper happiness than any amount of wealth. We're going to discover why friendship is the supreme good, why simple living beats luxury, why tranquility is more valuable than excitement, and most importantly, we're going to see how you can actually practice this philosophy. Today, right now, in your actual life, because that's what Epicurus offers. Not just ideas to think about, but a path to walk. Not just understanding, but transformation. This isn't just history. This isn't just philosophy. This is about your life, your fears, your desires, your happiness. This is about freedom. Are you ready? Let's meet the man who dared to challenge the gods themselves, and won. Let's discover the philosophy that can genuinely set you free. Let's enter the garden. Now, to understand Epicurus and his revolutionary ideas, we need to start with the man himself and the world he lived in. All right, let's talk about one of the most misunderstood philosophers in Western history, Epicurus, 341 to 270 BCE. And here's what's remarkable about this guy. He lived during what we call the Hellenistic era, which was basically the ancient world's version of our own anxious, uncertain times. Alexander the Great had just died. His empire was fragmenting, traditional city-state structures were collapsing, and people were asking, what do I do with my life when everything I thought was stable is falling apart? Sound familiar? Now Epicurus was born on the island of Samos, not Athens, which is important. He wasn't part of the philosophical establishment. He studied under followers of Democritus, this earlier thinker who had this wild idea that everything was made of tiny, uncuttable particles, atoms. And Epicurus took that idea and ran with it in a direction nobody expected. But here's where it gets interesting. When he came to Athens, the philosophical capital of the ancient world, he didn't set up shop in the agora like everyone else. He didn't compete for students in the marketplace. Instead, he bought a garden on the outskirts of the city and established what he simply called the garden. And this place, revolutionary doesn't even begin to describe it. Picture this. In a society where women couldn't own property, couldn't participate in public life, couldn't attend philosophical schools, Epicurus welcomed them as equals. In a slave-owning society where enslaved people were considered property, not persons, he invited them to philosophize alongside free citizens. The inscription over the gate reportedly read, "Stranger, here you will do well to tarry. Here our highest good is pleasure." Now, before you get the wrong idea, and trust me, people have been getting the wrong idea about that word pleasure for 2,300 years, we need to understand what Epicurus actually meant. Because this wasn't some ancient frat house. This was a community dedicated to something radical, the idea that ordinary people, through reason and friendship, could achieve genuine tranquility of mind. The establishment philosophers hated him. The Stoics thought he was soft. The Platonists thought he was crude. And later, Christian theologians would paint him as the ultimate hedonist, the enemy of virtue. But here's what they all missed. Epicurus was offering something genuinely new, a philosophy designed not for kings or aristocrats, but for regular people trying to live good lives in uncertain times. Now we need to talk about what made Epicurus's philosophy so dangerous to the ancient world. And it starts with his physics. Everything, and I mean everything, is made of atoms flying through infinite void. Your body, atoms. Your soul, atoms. The gods themselves, atoms. There is nothing else. No platonic forms floating in some perfect realm. No immaterial souls that survive death. No divine spark that makes humans special. Just atoms and void, eternally combining and recombining. Now, why is this radical? Because it completely eliminates the need for divine intervention in the natural world. You see lightning strike? That's not Zeus throwing thunderbolts because he's angry. It's atoms colliding in specific ways according to natural laws. Earthquake? Not Poseidon shaking the earth in rage. It's geological processes, atomic movements in the earth itself. Disease? Not divine punishment. It's natural causes that we can study and potentially treat. This is what we might call naturalistic explanation, and in the ancient world, this was revolutionary. Because if you can explain natural phenomena through atomic interactions, then you don't need to live in constant fear of offending the gods. You don't need to perform elaborate rituals. You don't need priests as intermediaries, but here's where Epicurus gets really clever. And this is something people often miss. He doesn't say the gods don't exist. That would have been too dangerous, too easily dismissed as atheism. Instead, he says, sure, the gods exist, but they're made of atoms too. Very fine, very stable atoms that give them perfect eternal bodies, and they live in the spaces between worlds, the intermundia, in a state of perfect bliss. And here's the kicker. They don't care about you. Not because they're cruel, but because caring about human affairs would disturb their perfect tranquility. Think about it. If you were perfectly happy, would you want to get involved in the messy, anxious, suffering-filled lives of mortals? The gods, in their wisdom, have achieved what Epicurus wants to teach us to achieve: ataraxia. Complete peace of mind. This is brilliant philosophy, but it's also brilliant psychology, because what Epicurus is doing is taking away the two great sources of human anxiety, fear of divine punishment and fear of death. If the gods don't care about your daily choices, you can't offend them. No divine punishment awaits. And if your soul is just atoms that disperse at death, well, we'll get to that implication in a moment, but you can already see where this is going. The ancient world ran on fear. Fear of the gods, fear of the afterlife, fear of cosmic punishment, and Epicurus walks in and says, "What if I could show you that all of that fear is based on a misunderstanding of how nature works?" That's why his philosophy was so threatening, not because it was about pleasure, but because it was about freedom. All right, let's pause here and really look at this image, because this isn't just any marble bust. This is how the ancient world remembered Epicurus. And there's something powerful in that gaze, isn't there? Look at those eyes, that contemplative expression. This is a man who thought deeply, carefully, fearlessly, and what he thought about changed the world. The revolutionary gaze. The sculptor who carved this captured something essential about Epicurus, that penetrating quality, that sense of someone who sees through illusions, because that's exactly what Epicurus did. He looked at the religious and superstitious beliefs that dominated ancient life, and he saw through them, not with mockery, not with anger, but with clear-eyed rational analysis. Imagine the courage that required. In the ancient world, religion wasn't a private matter. It was woven into every aspect of public and private life. You couldn't walk down the street without encountering shrines, altars, religious processions. You couldn't make a business decision without consulting omens. You couldn't understand natural phenomena without reference to divine will. And into this world steps Epicurus saying, what if we're wrong about all of this? Not the gods don't exist. That would have been too dangerous, too easily dismissed. But something more subtle and more subversive. What if the gods exist but don't care about us? What if thunder isn't Zeus's anger but a natural phenomenon? What if disease isn't divine punishment but has natural causes? Liberating humanity from fear. Now, here's what's crucial to understand. Epicurus wasn't challenging religion for intellectual sport. He wasn't trying to win arguments in the marketplace. He was trying to liberate people from fear. Because look at what religious belief meant in the ancient world, and I mean really look at it from the perspective of an ordinary person. You wake up in the morning, and before you can eat breakfast, you need to make offerings to the household gods. You see a bird flying in an unusual pattern. Is that an omen? Should you cancel your plans? You get sick. Which god did you offend? What sacrifice will appease them? Your child dies, and you torture yourself wondering what you did wrong, what divine punishment you're suffering, whether your child is suffering in the underworld. Every misfortune, every setback, every natural disaster is potentially a sign of divine displeasure, and you can never be sure you've done enough to appease the gods. You can never be certain you won't be punished. This is exhausting. This is a recipe for constant grinding anxiety, and Epicurus looks at this and says, this is unnecessary suffering. This is pain we're inflicting on ourselves through false beliefs. The method of liberation. But here's what makes Epicurus brilliant. He doesn't just say, stop believing. He provides a rational framework for understanding why these beliefs are false. He uses his atomic physics, everything is atoms and void, to explain natural phenomena without recourse to divine intervention. Lightning? Not Zeus throwing thunderbolts in anger. It's atoms colliding in the atmosphere in specific ways. We can observe patterns. We can predict it. It follows natural laws. Earthquakes? Not Poseidon shaking the earth. It's movements in the earth itself, atomic interactions we can study. Disease? Not divine punishment. It's natural causes. Bad air, contaminated water, imbalances in the body. Every time he provides a natural explanation, he's removing one more source of superstitious fear. And then he makes his most radical move. He redefines the gods themselves. Yes, he says, the gods exist. They're made of very fine, very stable atoms. They live in perfect bliss in the spaces between worlds, and precisely because they're perfectly happy, they cannot be disturbed by human affairs. Think about the genius of this argument. He's not denying the gods. That would be atheism, which was dangerous. But he's making them irrelevant to ethics and to daily life. If the gods are perfectly tranquil, they can't be angry. If they can't be angry, they can't punish. If they can't punish, you don't need to fear them. And if you don't need to fear divine punishment, then you're free to base your ethics on what actually promotes human flourishing, not on trying to appease cosmic forces. The penetrating vision. Look at that face again. That's the face of someone who's seen something others haven't. Epicurus saw that most human suffering is optional. It's created by false beliefs, by misunderstanding the nature of reality, by irrational fears. And he saw that philosophy, rational inquiry, careful observation, logical argument could cure this suffering. Not through faith, not through ritual, not through divine intervention, through understanding. If you understand that the gods don't punish, you stop fearing divine anger. If you understand that natural phenomena have natural causes, you stop seeing omens and portents everywhere. If you understand that death is simply the cessation of experience, you stop fearing the afterlife. Knowledge liberates, understanding frees. The self-examination. But here's what that marble gaze also suggests, and this is crucial. Epicurus wasn't just looking outward at the world, he was looking inward at himself. Philosophy for Epicurus begins with self-examination. What am I afraid of? Is that fear rational? What evidence do I have? What am I desiring? Is that desire necessary? Will satisfying it bring genuine happiness? This is the examined life Socrates talked about. But Epicurus gives it a specific therapeutic purpose: freedom from anxiety. That contemplative expression on the bust, that's not just abstract thinking. That's the look of someone engaged in the daily practice of examining his own mind, his own fears, his own desires. And this is what he's inviting others to do, not just to accept his teachings, but to examine their own lives with the same rational scrutiny. The ordinary person's philosopher. Now here's what's remarkable about this challenge to gods and superstition. Epicurus wasn't doing it for an elite audience. The Platonists were writing for intellectuals who could grasp abstract forms. The Stoics were writing for educated Romans who could follow complex logical arguments. But Epicurus? He was writing for everyone. His atomic theory is sophisticated, yes, but his core message is simple enough for anyone to grasp. The gods don't punish you. Death is nothing. Natural phenomena have natural causes. You can be free from superstitious fear. This is philosophy as medicine, available to all. Not restricted to the educated elite, but offered freely to anyone willing to think rationally about their fears. That's why the garden welcomed women and slaves. That's why Diogenes carved Epicurean teachings on a public wall. That's why Epicureans spread their philosophy so evangelically, because they genuinely believed, and had evidence from their own experience, that understanding could liberate people from unnecessary suffering. The legacy of that gaze. When you look at this bust, you're looking at one of the most revolutionary thinkers in human history. Not because he had the most complex system, not because he wrote the most books, not because he founded the biggest school, but because he dared to say, what if everything we've been told about the gods is wrong? What if we're creating our own suffering through false beliefs? What if we could be free? And then he provided a path to that freedom, through reason, through observation, through daily practice. That penetrating gaze, it's still challenging us today. Are your fears rational? Are your beliefs about the world based on evidence or superstition? Are you creating unnecessary suffering through false beliefs about what you need to be happy? Epicurus is looking at you across 2,300 years asking, are you willing to examine your life? Are you willing to challenge your assumptions? Are you willing to be free? That's the invitation in those marble eyes. That's the challenge from this ancient philosopher who saw through the veils of religious dogma and irrational fear. And it's an invitation that's still open, still relevant, still powerful. Because we still have our superstitions. Maybe not about Zeus and Poseidon, but about what we need to be happy, about what we should fear, about what gives life meaning. And Epicurus is still offering the same medicine. Examine your beliefs. Test them against reality. Free yourself from irrational fear. The thinker who challenged gods and superstition is challenging you. Will you accept the challenge? So that's the man, the revolutionary thinker whose penetrating gaze saw through superstition and offered humanity a path to freedom through reason. Now, when we move to the next slide, we're going to see exactly how he delivers on that promise through his famous fourfold cure for anxiety. Alright, now we get to what might be Epicurus' most elegant contribution to philosophy, the tetrapharmakos, the fourfold remedy. Think of this as a prescription. You go to a doctor with anxiety and the doctor gives you 4 medicines. But these aren't pills, they're philosophical principles. And Epicurus believed that if you really internalized these 4 truths, you could cure yourself of the anxiety that plagues human existence. First medicine. Don't fear the gods. We've already covered this, but let's state it clearly. The gods are blessed and immortal beings. They exist in perfect tranquility. They are incapable of anger, incapable of involvement in human affairs. They cannot harm you. Full stop. Now notice what Epicurus is doing here. He's not asking you to have faith. He's not asking you to trust in divine benevolence. He's giving you a logical argument based on the nature of perfect happiness. If the gods are perfectly happy, they can't be disturbed by you. Therefore, you can't offend them. Therefore, you don't need to fear them. It's philosophy as anxiety medication. Second medicine. Don't fear death. Again, we've covered the argument, but the prescription is simple. Death is the absence of sensation. What doesn't exist cannot harm us. When death arrives, we are not there to experience it. Therefore, death is nothing to us. And here's what's psychologically brilliant about this. Epicurus isn't telling you to be brave in the face of death. He's not asking you to cultivate courage or stoic acceptance. He's showing you that the thing you're afraid of is literally nothing. It's a category error to fear it. Third medicine. Goods are easy to obtain. Now this is where we start to see Epicurus' distinctive ethics emerging. What do you actually need to be happy? Not what does society tell you you need. Not what your ambition tells you you need. What does nature require for genuine pleasure? Food, water, shelter, companionship. That's it. That's the list. If you're hungry, a crust of bread brings more pleasure than a feast brings to someone who's already full. If you're thirsty, water is more delicious than wine. If you're cold, simple shelter is bliss. Nature's necessities are readily available. You don't need wealth. You don't need luxury. You don't need to climb the social ladder or achieve fame or accumulate possessions. This is radical in a consumer culture, whether ancient or modern. Because what Epicurus is saying is, the things that bring genuine pleasure are simple, natural, and available to almost everyone. The anxiety of endless acquisition, unnecessary. The fear of poverty, overblown. The constant striving for more, a recipe for misery, not happiness. Fourth medicine. Evils are easy to endure. This one requires more nuance, and it shows Epicurus' realism. He's not saying suffering doesn't exist. He's not saying pain isn't real. He's saying intense pain is brief, chronic pain is moderate, and either way it's temporary and bearable. Now this might sound cold until you understand what he's doing. He's giving you a mental framework for enduring unavoidable suffering. If you're in intense pain, say a kidney stone, it's unbearable, but it won't last long. The body can't sustain that level of pain indefinitely. Either it passes, or you pass out, or you die. And if you die, well, we're back to medicine number 2. Death is nothing. If you're in chronic pain, the kind that lasts for years, it's moderate enough that you can still think, still philosophize, still enjoy friendship and simple pleasures. Your mind can cultivate tranquility even while your body suffers. And here's the thing about Epicurus. He wasn't just theorizing. The man suffered from kidney stones for years. Painful, recurring, agonizing kidney stones. And according to the accounts we have, he maintained his philosophical serenity through it all. There's this letter he wrote on what turned out to be his deathbed. He's dying. He's in pain. And he writes to his friend, "On this truly happy day of my life, as I am at the point of death, I write this to you. The diseases in my bladder and stomach are pursuing their course, lacking nothing of their usual severity. But against all this is the joy in my heart, at the recollection of my conversations with you." Read that again. He's dying in pain, and he's calling it a truly happy day, because he can remember philosophical conversations with his friends. That's not stoic endurance. That's not gritting your teeth and bearing it. That's genuine philosophical transformation, the ability to find joy even in the presence of physical suffering. Now let's step back and look at what these 4 medicines accomplish together. They eliminate the 2 great cosmic fears, gods and death, and they reframe the 2 great earthly concerns, obtaining goods and enduring evils, as manageable, even easy. What you're left with is a person who is free. Free from supernatural anxiety, free from the fear of non-existence, free from the tyranny of endless desire, free from being overwhelmed by suffering. And here's what I want you to notice. This isn't about becoming superhuman. Epicurus isn't asking you to transcend your nature. He's asking you to understand your nature correctly. You're an atomic being in an atomic universe. You have simple, natural needs that are easily met. You will experience pleasure and pain, but both are temporary. And when it's all over, you won't be there to regret anything. Once you really get this, once you internalize it, the question becomes, how should I live this life, right now, with the time I actually have? And that's where Epicurus's ethics gets really interesting, because his answer isn't, do whatever feels good. It's much more sophisticated than that. He's going to redefine pleasure itself. He's going to distinguish between different types of desires. He's going to show you that the path to happiness isn't through indulgence, but through wisdom, friendship, and simplicity. But before we get there, I want you to sit with these 4 medicines for a moment. Don't fear the gods. Don't fear death. Goods are easy to obtain. Evils are easy to endure. If you really believed these 4 things, not just intellectually, but in your bones, how would your life change? What anxieties would dissolve? What would you stop pursuing? What would you start cherishing? Because that's what Epicurus is offering. Not a theory, but a cure. Not an argument to win, but a way to live. The ancient world called this the tetrapharmakos, the fourfold remedy, and for hundreds of years people memorized these principles, meditated on them daily, used them as a kind of philosophical medicine to treat the anxiety that comes with being human. In our next section, we're going to see how Epicurus builds on this foundation to create a complete ethics, a guide to living well. And that's where we'll finally understand what he really meant by pleasure. All right, here's where we get to the heart of the matter, and where 2,300 years of misunderstanding begins. Epicurus declares that pleasure is the sole intrinsic good, the only thing good in itself. Everything else, virtue, wisdom, justice, courage, these are good only because they lead to pleasure, and the ancient world lost its mind. The Stoics accused him of reducing humans to animals. The Platonists said he was destroying the very foundation of morality. And later, Christian theologians would paint Epicureans as debauched hedonists, rolling around in sensory excess, slaves to their appetites. But here's the thing, and this is crucial. They completely misunderstood what Epicurus meant by pleasure. When most people hear pleasure, they think of what Epicurus calls kinetic pleasure. The pleasure of movement, the taste of wine, the thrill of sex, the excitement of entertainment, active, dynamic, sensory stimulation. And yes, Epicurus acknowledges these pleasures exist. But they're not what he's talking about when he says pleasure is the highest good. What he's talking about is what he calls katastematic pleasure, the pleasure of stasis, of a stable state. And specifically 2 states. Aponia, the absence of bodily pain, and ataraxia, the absence of mental disturbance. Let me say that again, because this is the key to understanding everything. The highest pleasure is the absence of pain and the absence of anxiety, not the presence of exciting sensations. The absence of suffering. Now this might sound negative at first, like Epicurus is just trying to avoid bad things rather than pursue good things. But think about it more carefully. When are you most happy? Really, genuinely content? Is it when you're at some wild party, overstimulated and exhausted? Or is it when you're sitting with good friends, having a simple meal, engaged in interesting conversation, with no pressing worries, no pain, no anxiety? Just peace? That's what Epicurus is pointing to. That state of tranquil contentment, where all your needs are met, you're not in pain, you're not worried about the future, and you're fully present in the moment. And here's what's psychologically brilliant about this. Once you achieve this state, once you're not hungry, not thirsty, not in pain, not anxious, you can't improve on it. You can add more intense pleasures, sure. You can drink finer wine, eat richer food, pursue more exciting experiences, but you're not actually happier. You're just varying the pleasure, not increasing it. In fact, and this is where Epicurus gets really radical, pursuing those intense kinetic pleasures often decreases your overall happiness, because they create new desires, new dependencies, new anxieties. Let me give you an example. You're hungry, you eat a simple meal, bread, cheese, olives. Your hunger is satisfied. You've achieved aponia, absence of bodily pain. You're content. Now, you could pursue a gourmet feast instead. Multiple courses, exotic ingredients, complex flavors. And yes, there's pleasure in that. But here's what happens. You develop a taste for luxury. Simple food no longer satisfies you. You become dependent on access to expensive ingredients. You worry about maintaining your refined palate. You've actually increased your vulnerability to suffering. The person who can be satisfied with bread and water is more free than the person who needs caviar and champagne, because their happiness doesn't depend on circumstances beyond their control. This is what Epicurus means when he says goods are easy to obtain. He's not saying you should never enjoy fine things. He's saying your happiness shouldn't depend on them. Now let's talk about desires, because this is where Epicurus' psychology gets really sophisticated. He divides desires into 3 categories. Natural and necessary, like hunger, thirst, shelter from cold. These must be satisfied for happiness, but they're easy to satisfy. Natural but unnecessary, like the desire for gourmet food instead of simple food, or sex, or variety in experience. These are natural, they're not bad, but you don't need them for happiness. Vain and empty, like the desire for fame, wealth, power, luxury. These are neither natural nor necessary. They're culturally created, and they're insatiable. You can never get enough fame, enough wealth, enough power. And here's the key insight. The path to happiness is satisfying the natural and necessary desires, being moderate with the natural but unnecessary ones, and eliminating the vain and empty desires altogether. Because those vain desires, they're the source of most human misery. They can never be fully satisfied. They create anxiety. They make you dependent on things beyond your control, other people's opinions, market fluctuations, political power. The person chasing wealth and fame is on a treadmill that never stops. The person content with simple necessities has already arrived at happiness. Now, does this mean Epicurus wants you to live like an ascetic? Absolutely not. He's not a stoic, preaching indifference to pleasure. He's not a cynic, living in a barrel and rejecting all comfort. He's saying, enjoy pleasures, but wisely. Drink wine if you want, but don't become dependent on it. Enjoy good food, but don't let your happiness require it. Pursue interesting experiences, but don't sacrifice your tranquility for them. It's a philosophy of intelligent hedonism, maximizing pleasure by minimizing vulnerability to suffering. And here's where it connects back to virtue. Remember, Epicurus said, wisdom, justice, and courage are good because they lead to pleasure. Now we can see how. Wisdom helps you distinguish which desires to pursue and which to eliminate. It shows you the path to stable pleasure. Justice keeps you from harming others, which would create anxiety about punishment and damage your relationships, which are crucial for happiness. Courage, not the courage to face death in battle, but the courage to face your fears rationally, to endure necessary pain, to live according to your principles even when it's difficult. These virtues aren't good in themselves, they're instrumental goods, tools for achieving the ultimate good of tranquil pleasure. This is consequentialist ethics, 2,000 years before Bentham and Mill. But it's a much more sophisticated consequentialism, because Epicurus understands that humans aren't just pleasure-calculating machines. We're social, rational beings whose deepest pleasures come from friendship, philosophy, and peace of mind. Now we get to what Epicurus considered the supreme good in human life. And this is going to surprise you if you think Epicureanism is all about selfish pleasure-seeking. Friendship. Not just any friendship, deep philosophical friendship. The kind of friendship where you can be completely yourself, where you pursue wisdom together, where you support each other in living well. Epicurus says, and I'm quoting here, "Of all the things which wisdom provides for the happiness of the whole life, by far the most important is the acquisition of friendship." By far the most important. Not food, not shelter, not even freedom from pain. Friendship. Now why? If pleasure is the highest good, and pleasure is just the absence of pain and anxiety, why is friendship so crucial? Because humans are social animals. We can't achieve tranquility in isolation. Our deepest anxieties and our greatest joys are bound up with other people. Think about what creates anxiety in your life. A huge portion of it is social, isn't it? Fear of rejection, fear of betrayal, worry about what others think, conflict in relationships, loneliness. And think about what brings you joy. Again, so much of it is social. Shared laughter, deep conversation, being understood, being valued, belonging. Epicurus understood this profoundly, and the garden, that community he established, was built around it. This wasn't just a school where you showed up for lectures and left. This was a community. People lived together, ate together, philosophized together. They supported each other financially and emotionally. They celebrated together. They mourned together. And crucially, and this is what made it so radical, they treated each other as equals regardless of social status, gender, or legal freedom. In a society rigidly stratified by class, where women were essentially property and slaves were tools that could talk, the garden said, if you're committed to philosophy, if you're pursuing wisdom and tranquility, you're our friend. Full stop. This is revolutionary, and it's grounded in Epicurus ethics. Because if pleasure is the highest good, and if all humans are capable of experiencing pleasure and pain, then all humans have equal moral status. Your capacity for happiness doesn't depend on your social class or your gender or your legal status. It depends on your ability to satisfy natural desires and achieve tranquility. So in the garden, a slave could philosophize alongside a wealthy merchant. A woman could engage in intellectual discourse with male citizens. Social hierarchies dissolved in the pursuit of wisdom and friendship. Now let's talk about the other pillar, freedom, but not freedom in the political sense. Epicurus actually advised against political involvement. Lev unknown, lathe bioses, that's his famous motto. Don't seek political office, don't pursue fame. Don't get involved in the turbulent, anxious world of public life. And this shocked the ancient world. Because in Greek culture, especially Athenian culture, political participation was considered the highest form of human activity. Aristotle said humans are political animals. The good life was the life of the citizen engaged in public affairs. Epicurus says, no, that's a recipe for anxiety. Politics involves competition, conflict, the pursuit of honor and power, all those vain and empty desires we talked about. It makes your happiness dependent on things completely beyond your control, elections, public opinion, the machinations of rivals. The politically ambitious person can never rest. There's always another office to seek, another rival to defeat, another crisis to manage. The person who withdraws from politics and focuses on philosophy and friendship, they're free from that anxiety, free to cultivate their garden, literally and metaphorically. Now this doesn't mean Epicurus advocated complete social withdrawal. The garden existed in Athens, not isolated from it. Epicureans still had families, still engaged in commerce, still participated in cultural life. But they didn't let their happiness depend on public recognition or political success. They found their meaning in private life, in friendship, in philosophy, in simple pleasures. And there's a third element here that's crucial, philosophical reflection. This wasn't just about having friends and avoiding politics. It was about daily practice, what we might call spiritual exercises. Epicureans would memorize the principal doctrines. They'd meditate on them daily. They'd examine their desires. Is this natural and necessary? Natural but unnecessary? Vain and empty? They'd practice what later philosophers would call negative visualization, imagining loss to appreciate what they have. They'd rehearse arguments against fear. They'd write letters to each other discussing philosophical problems. Philosophy wasn't something you studied. It was something you practiced. It was therapy for the soul, requiring daily attention and discipline. And here's what's beautiful about this. It's completely accessible. You don't need special training. You don't need to be brilliant. You don't need wealth or status. You need friends who care about living well. You need the discipline to examine your desires. You need the courage to face your fears rationally. That's it. That's the path to tranquility. The garden embodied this perfectly. It was a space where ordinary people, not philosophical geniuses, not aristocrats, just regular humans, could support each other in living wisely and well. And the evidence suggests it worked. Epicurean communities lasted for centuries. People reported genuine transformation, freedom from anxiety, deeper happiness, more meaningful lives. Because here's what Epicurus understood that so many philosophers miss. Ethics isn't primarily about abstract principles. It's about how to live. And you can't live well alone. You need community. You need support. You need friends who share your values and help you stay on the path. That's why the garden wasn't just a philosophical school. It was a way of life. All right, let's confront the elephant in the room. Because for over 2,000 years, Epicurean has been synonymous with indulgence, luxury, and sensory excess. When someone today says that restaurant is so Epicurean, They mean it's decadent, extravagant, gourmet. When we talk about an epicure, we mean someone with refined, expensive tastes. And this is one of the greatest misrepresentations in the history of philosophy. Let me show you the contrast, because it's stark. The stereotype: endless banquets with exotic delicacies, wine flowing freely, sensory indulgence of every kind, moral licentiousness, do whatever feels good, rejection of all discipline and restraint, living for the moment with no thought for consequences. This is what people think Epicureanism means. This is what his enemies accused him of teaching. And this caricature stuck so thoroughly that even today, most people have no idea what Epicurus actually said. The reality: Epicurus lived on bread, water, and vegetables. Occasionally, as a special treat, some cheese. There's this letter where he writes to a friend, "Send me some preserved cheese so that when I like I may have a feast." Cheese. That's his idea of a feast. Not roasted peacock. Not imported delicacies. Cheese. He wrote, "I am thrilled with pleasure in the body when I live on bread and water, and I spit upon luxurious pleasures not for their own sake, but because of the inconveniences that follow them." Read that carefully. He's not rejecting luxury because it's morally wrong. He's rejecting it because it creates inconveniences, dependencies, anxieties, vulnerabilities. The person who needs luxury to be happy is a slave to circumstances. The person who can be happy with simple food is free. Now, where did this stereotype come from? Why did it stick so thoroughly? Partly, it's his enemies. The Stoics wanted to paint themselves as the serious, virtuous philosophers, and Epicureans as the soft, self-indulgent ones. The Platonists thought any philosophy based on pleasure was inherently degrading, and later, Christian theologians needed a villain, an example of pagan decadence to contrast with Christian virtue. But here's what's insidious about this misrepresentation. It worked because people want to believe it. It's much easier to dismiss Epicurus if you can paint him as advocating mindless hedonism, because then you don't have to grapple with his actual arguments. You don't have to confront his challenge to conventional morality. And let's be honest, there's something appealing about the caricature, isn't there? A philosopher says pleasure is good? Great. I can do whatever I want and call it philosophy. But that's not what Epicurus is offering. What he's offering is much harder and much more valuable. He's offering a systematic method for examining your desires, distinguishing the ones that lead to genuine happiness from the ones that lead to suffering. He's offering a path to freedom from anxiety through rational understanding. He's offering a community-based practice of wisdom and friendship. That requires discipline. That requires self-examination. That requires the courage to go against social pressure and live simply when everyone else is chasing status and luxury. The real Epicureanism is harder than conventional morality, not easier, because it asks you to think clearly about every desire, every fear, every choice. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. Say you're offered a promotion at work. More money, more status, more power. Conventional morality might say, "Great. Success. Take it." An Epicurean analysis asks, what desires does this satisfy? Is it natural and necessary? Natural but unnecessary? Vain and empty? The money. If you're already meeting your basic needs, additional wealth is natural but unnecessary. It might bring some pleasure, but it's not required for happiness. The status and power, these are vain and empty desires. They can never be fully satisfied. There's always someone with more status, more power, and they make your happiness dependent on other people's opinions and organizational politics. The work itself. Will it increase or decrease your anxiety? Will it give you less time for friendship and philosophy? Will it create new dependencies and vulnerabilities? An Epicurean might well turn down that promotion, not because they're lazy or unambitious, but because they've calculated that it would decrease their overall happiness. That's not indulgence. That's wisdom. Or consider another example. You're invited to an extravagant party. Expensive food, premium alcohol, entertainment, social networking opportunities. The caricature Epicurean goes and indulges in everything. The actual Epicurean asks, will this bring genuine pleasure or just fleeting stimulation? Will I enjoy it in the moment but regret it later? Will it create new desires I'll struggle to satisfy? Will it take time away from deeper friendships? They might go and have a simple, moderate good time. Or they might skip it entirely and have a quiet dinner with close friends instead. Because remember, the highest pleasure is tranquility. And tranquility comes from satisfying natural and necessary desires, cultivating wisdom, and enjoying deep friendship. A wild party might be exciting, but excitement isn't tranquility. In fact, intense stimulation often disturbs tranquility. Now here's what I want you to notice. The real Epicurean philosophy is actually quite demanding. It requires constant self-examination. It requires going against social pressure. It requires the discipline to moderate your desires. It requires the courage to live differently from everyone around you. The garden wasn't a pleasure palace. It was a philosophical community devoted to simple living, deep friendship, and the cultivation of wisdom. The people who lived there weren't indulging every whim. They were practicing daily meditation on philosophical principles. They were examining their desires. They were supporting each other in living wisely. That's not easy. That's not the path of least resistance. But according to Epicurus, and according to the testimony of thousands of his followers over centuries, it works. It genuinely leads to deeper, more stable happiness than the conventional pursuit of wealth, status, and sensory pleasure. So when you hear someone use Epicurean to mean indulgent, you can correct them. The real Epicurus would have been appalled by what passes for Epicureanism today. He wasn't teaching indulgence. He was teaching freedom. Now we need to talk about how Epicurus thinks we can know anything, because this is crucial to his whole project. Remember, Epicurus is trying to free people from fear and anxiety. But you can't do that if you're skeptical about whether you can know anything at all. If you can't trust your senses, how do you know which fears are real and which are imaginary? If you can't distinguish genuine dangers from false ones, you're stuck in perpetual anxiety. So Epicurus needs a theory of knowledge, what he calls the canon of truth. And it's beautifully simple. There are 3 criteria of truth. First, sensations. Your senses are in direct contact with reality. How? Through those atomic films we talked about earlier, thin layers of atoms that emanate from objects and strike your sense organs. When you see a tree, atomic films from that tree are literally entering your eye. When you smell bread baking, atoms from the bread are entering your nose. Your senses are receiving actual physical information from the world. And here's the crucial claim. Sensations never deceive. Now wait. You might object. What about optical illusions? What about dreams? What about when a stick looks bent in water but is actually straight? Epicurus's answer is sophisticated. The sensation itself is accurate. The atomic films really are hitting your eye in that configuration. What deceives is your judgment about the sensation. The stick in water really does send bent-looking atomic films to your eye because of how water refracts light. Your sensation is accurate. Your judgment, the stick is bent, is wrong. So sensations are always reliable. Only our interpretations can err. This is a direct rejection of academic skepticism, the school that said we can't know anything with certainty. Epicurus says, no, we have direct, reliable access to reality through our senses. Second, preconceptions. This is what we might call concepts or general ideas. Through repeated sensations, your mind forms templates. What Epicurus calls prolepsis. You see many horses, and your mind creates a general concept, horse, that allows you to recognize new horses and communicate about horses with others. These preconceptions are like mental filing systems. They're formed from experience, but once formed, they allow you to organize and understand new experiences. When someone says horse, you immediately know what they mean because you have that preconception. You don't have to relearn what a horse is every time you encounter one. This is Epicurus's answer to Plato. Plato said we have innate knowledge of eternal forms. Epicurus says, no, all our concepts come from experience. But once formed from repeated sensations, they become reliable tools for understanding the world. Third, feelings. This is the most interesting one. Pleasure and pain are immediate, non-rational indicators of what promotes or hinders your flourishing. When something causes you pain, that's nature's way of saying, avoid this. When something brings pleasure, that's nature saying, this is good for you. Now, this doesn't mean every pleasure should be pursued or every pain avoided. Remember, Epicurus is all about wise calculation. But feelings provide raw data about what matters for your well-being. A child doesn't need philosophical training to know that fire hurts and should be avoided. The pain itself is information. Similarly, you don't need a theory to know that friendship feels good and loneliness feels bad. Your feelings are telling you something true about human nature. So these three criteria, sensations, preconceptions, and feelings, give you reliable access to truth. Now, why does this matter for Epicurus's project? Because if you can't trust your senses, you can't distinguish real dangers from imaginary ones. You're trapped in skeptical anxiety. Maybe the gods are angry, maybe death is terrible, maybe you need luxury to be happy. You can't know, so you're stuck in perpetual uncertainty. But if your senses are reliable, if your concepts are grounded in experience, if your feelings provide genuine information, then you can investigate the world and discover the truth. You can observe that lightning follows natural patterns, not divine anger. You can reason that death brings no sensation. You can test whether simple pleasures or luxurious ones bring more stable happiness. Knowledge becomes possible, and with knowledge comes freedom from irrational fear. This is why Epicurus rejected academic skepticism so forcefully. The skeptic said, "We can't know anything for certain, so we should suspend judgment about everything." Epicurus said, "That's a recipe for paralysis and anxiety. We can know things, our senses are reliable, and we must use that knowledge to live well." Now, there's something really important here about Epicurus' whole philosophical method. He's not doing abstract metaphysics for its own sake. He's not trying to construct an elaborate system just to show how clever he is. Every part of his philosophy, the atomic physics, the theory of knowledge, the ethics, is in service of a therapeutic goal, helping people live better lives. The physics shows you that the universe operates by natural laws, not divine whim. That eliminates fear of the gods. The theory of knowledge shows you that you can trust your senses and reason. That gives you confidence to investigate the world and overcome superstition. The ethics shows you how to achieve genuine happiness through wisdom and friendship. That gives you a positive path forward. It's all connected, it's all practical, it's all aimed at human flourishing. And this is where Epicurus's philosophy becomes genuinely therapeutic, what we might call philosophical therapy, or even proto-psychology. He's diagnosing the sources of human misery, false beliefs about gods, death, and desire. He's prescribing a cure, correct understanding of nature, rational examination of fears, wise management of desires. And he's providing a method, daily practice, community support, philosophical reflection. This isn't just theory, it's a complete program for transforming your life. Think about it like this. Most human anxiety comes from false beliefs. You're anxious about divine punishment, but that's based on a false belief about the god's nature. You're anxious about death, but that's based on a false belief that death involves experience. You're anxious about not having enough, but that's based on false beliefs about what you need for happiness. If you can correct those false beliefs through rational investigation, using your reliable senses and reason, you can eliminate the anxiety. That's the promise of Epicurean philosophy. Not just understanding the world, but using that understanding to achieve ataraxia, unshakable peace of mind. And the canon, this theory of knowledge, is what makes it possible, because it gives you confidence that you can know the truth and that the truth will set you free. Alright, now we get to the practical application, the actual practice of Epicurean philosophy, because this isn't just theory. This is a daily discipline, a set of techniques for transforming your mind and your life. And Epicurus approaches this like a physician approaches disease. Step 1. Diagnosis. Most human suffering doesn't come from actual threats. It comes from false beliefs about threats. You're not suffering because the gods are actually punishing you. You're suffering because you believe they might. You're not suffering because death is actually terrible. You're suffering because you fear it will be. You're not suffering because you lack necessities. You're suffering because you desire luxuries you don't need. The disease is misunderstanding. The symptom is anxiety. And here's what's brilliant about Epicurus' diagnosis. He's saying that most of your suffering is optional. It's self-inflicted through false beliefs and mismanaged desires. That sounds harsh, but it's actually liberating. Because if your suffering comes from false beliefs, then you can cure it by correcting those beliefs. You're not helpless. You're not at the mercy of fate or the gods. You have agency. Think about your own anxieties right now. How many of them are about things that haven't happened yet and probably never will? How many are based on worst-case scenarios that your mind has constructed? How many are rooted in desires for things you don't actually need? That's what Epicurus is pointing to. Your mind is creating suffering through imagination and false belief. Step 2. Philosophical therapy. So how do you cure this disease of misunderstanding? Through daily practice. And Epicurus is very specific about what this practice looks like. First, memorize the core doctrines. The principal doctrines, those fundamental truths we've been discussing, weren't meant to be read once and filed away. They were meant to be memorized, internalized, repeated daily until they became automatic. Don't fear the gods. Don't fear death. Goods are easy to obtain. Evils are easy to endure. You rehearse these like mantras. Not mindlessly but thoughtfully. You meditate on their meaning. You apply them to your current situation. When you feel anxiety rising, you have these truths immediately available. You can examine the anxiety. Is this fear rational? Is it based on a false belief? What does Epicurean philosophy say about this? Second, examine each desire. This is daily work. Every time you feel a desire arising, you ask, what kind of desire is this? Is it natural and necessary, like hunger or thirst? Then satisfy it simply and move on. Is it natural but unnecessary, like the desire for gourmet food or sexual pleasure? Then consider, will pursuing this bring stable pleasure or create new anxieties? Will it make me dependent on things I can't control? Is it vain and empty, like the desire for fame, wealth, or power? Then recognize it as a source of suffering and let it go. This isn't suppression. This isn't denying your desires. This is understanding them, categorizing them, and making wise choices about which to pursue. And here's what happens over time. You start to notice patterns. You realize that certain desires always lead to disappointment. You notice that simple pleasures bring more stable happiness than complex ones. You become wiser about what actually makes you happy. Third, rehearse arguments against fear. This is what we might call cognitive restructuring, actively challenging your anxious thoughts with rational arguments. You feel fear of death rising? You rehearse the argument. When I exist, death is not present. When death is present, I do not exist. Therefore, death is nothing to me. You feel anxiety about divine punishment? You rehearse. The gods are perfectly happy. Perfect happiness cannot be disturbed. Therefore, the gods cannot be angry with me. You feel overwhelmed by suffering? You rehearse. Intense pain is brief. Chronic pain is moderate. Either way, I can endure it through philosophical reflection. This isn't just positive thinking or self-deception. This is rational examination of your fears, testing them against logic and evidence, and the more you practice this, the more automatic it becomes. Your mind starts to catch irrational fears before they spiral into full anxiety. Fourth, practice negative visualization. This is a technique Epicurus shares with the Stoics. Imagine losing what you have. Imagine your friend dying. Imagine losing your home. Imagine poverty. Now, why would you do this? Isn't that just creating anxiety? No, because you're doing it rationally, not emotionally. You're preparing yourself. You're recognizing that everything is temporary, that loss is inevitable, that change is constant. And paradoxically, this makes you appreciate what you have now. That friend you might lose, cherish them today, that simple meal, savor it because you might not always have it. It also reduces the shock when loss actually occurs. You've already mentally rehearsed it. You know you can survive it. Step 3. Living example. Now here's where Epicurus's own life becomes crucial to understanding his philosophy. The man suffered. He had chronic kidney stones. If you've ever had kidney stones, you know this is excruciating pain. Recurring, unpredictable, agonizing. And yet, by all accounts, he maintained his philosophical serenity. There's that letter I mentioned earlier, written on his deathbed. He's dying. He's in pain. And he writes, "On this truly happy day of my life, as I am at the point of death, I write this to you. The diseases in my bladder and stomach are pursuing their course, lacking nothing of their usual severity. But against all this is the joy in my heart at the recollection of my conversations with you." Now let's be clear. He's not saying the pain doesn't exist. He's not claiming some superhuman indifference to suffering. He's acknowledging the pain, lacking nothing of their usual severity. But he's also demonstrating that mental cultivation can triumph over physical adversity. The joy of philosophical friendship is real enough powerful enough to coexist with intense physical pain. This is the proof of concept. This is Epicurus showing that his philosophy actually works. And here's what I want you to notice. He's not doing this alone. He's writing to a friend. He's finding joy in the recollection of philosophical conversations. The community matters. The friendships matter. The shared practice matters. You can't just read Epicurus and expect transformation. You need to practice. You need community. You need daily discipline. The garden wasn't just a place to learn philosophy. It was a place to practice philosophy together, to support each other, to remind each other of the core truths when anxiety strikes, to celebrate simple pleasures together, to philosophize through suffering together. This is why Epicureanism lasted for centuries. Not because it had the most sophisticated arguments, though it did have sophisticated arguments, but because it worked. People who practiced it reported genuine transformation. They became less anxious. They found deeper happiness in simple things. They built meaningful friendships. They faced death with equanimity. That's the promise. Not a theory to believe, but a practice that transforms your life. But it requires work, daily work, examining your desires, challenging your fears, memorizing core truths, practicing with others. Let's talk about what happened. Are you willing to do that work over the next 2,000 years? Because the story of Epicureanism's legacy is fascinating, and tragic, and ultimately hopeful. Ancient flourishing, for about 600 years, Epicureanism was one of the dominant philosophical schools in the Mediterranean world. Gardens appeared everywhere, in Athens, in Rome, in Alexandria, across the Greek-speaking world. Thousands of people practiced Epicurean philosophy. It became the chief rival to Stoicism for the hearts and minds of educated Romans. And we have evidence that it genuinely transformed lives. Letters between Epicureans showed deep friendships, mutual support, philosophical discussions. Inscriptions on tombs declare allegiance to Epicurean principles. People bequeathed money to support gardens in their wills. The most beautiful expression of Epicurean philosophy comes from the Roman poet Lucretius, who wrote De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things. Around 50 BCE, this is 7,400 lines of sublime Latin poetry explaining Epicurean physics and ethics. And it's not just explanation, it's evangelism. Lucretius is on fire with the conviction that Epicurean philosophy can save humanity from superstition and fear. He writes about Epicurus, when human life lay groveling in all men's sight, crushed to the earth under the dead weight of superstition. A man of Greece was first to raise mortal eyes in defiance, first to stand erect and brave the challenge. That's how Epicureans saw their founder, as a liberator, freeing humanity from the tyranny of irrational fear. Medieval eclipse. But then Christianity happened, and for Epicureanism, this was catastrophic. The early church fathers, Tertullian, Augustine, Lactantius, they hated Epicurus. They painted him as the ultimate enemy of Christian virtue. Why? Well, think about it from their perspective. Epicurus says the gods don't care about human affairs. Christianity says God is intimately involved in every detail of creation. Epicurus says death is nothing. Christianity says death is the gateway to eternal reward or punishment. Epicurus says pleasure is the highest good. Christianity says virtue and obedience to God are the highest goods. Epicurus says the soul is material and dies with the body. Christianity says the soul is immortal and faces judgment. Every core Epicurean doctrine contradicted Christian teaching, so the Church systematically destroyed Epicurean texts. They condemned Epicureanism as atheistic hedonism. They made Epicureans synonymous with godless pleasure seeker, and it worked. By the early Middle Ages, almost all Epicurean texts were lost. The gardens were gone, the practice disappeared. All that survived were fragments, quotations in the works of critics, a few letters, some scattered sayings preserved by chance. For 1,000 years, Epicureanism was effectively dead in the Western world. Renaissance revival. But here's where the story gets interesting. In 1417, an Italian book hunter named Poggio Bracciolini was searching through a monastery library in Germany, and he found something extraordinary, a complete manuscript of Lucretius's De Rerum Natura. This poem had been lost for centuries, and suddenly here it was, a complete, beautiful expression of Epicurean philosophy. Poggio copied it. The copy was copied. Within decades it was circulating throughout Renaissance Italy, and it was explosive. Here was a philosophy that explained the natural world without recourse to divine intervention, that celebrated pleasure and friendship, that challenged religious authority, that offered freedom from fear. The Renaissance humanists loved it. They started reading other recovered Epicurean texts, Diogenes Laertius's biography, Cicero's critiques. They began to reconstruct Epicurean philosophy, and this fed into the broader Renaissance project of recovering classical learning, challenging medieval scholasticism, and developing more human-centered philosophies. Then came the Enlightenment, and Epicurus became a hero to the philosophers. Pierre Gassendi in the 17th century tried to reconcile Epicurean atomism with Christianity, not entirely successfully, but he brought Epicurus back into respectable philosophical discourse. Thomas Jefferson called himself an Epicurean. He wrote, "I too am an Epicurean. I consider the genuine, not the imputed, doctrines of Epicurus as containing everything rational in moral philosophy which Greece and Rome have left us." The French materialists, Diderot, D'Holbach, Helvetius, they embraced Epicurean atomism and naturalism as weapons against religious superstition. John Stuart Mill, developing utilitarianism, acknowledged his debt to Epicurus's pleasure-based ethics, though Mill's version was quite different. Karl Marx wrote his doctoral dissertation on Epicurus and Democritus. He saw in Epicurus a materialist philosopher who challenged both religious and political authority. So Epicureanism didn't just survive, it became foundational to modern secular philosophy, to scientific materialism, to liberal political theory, to utilitarian ethics. The modern rediscovery. But here's what's really exciting. In the 20th and 21st centuries, we've discovered new Epicurean texts. In Herculaneum, that Roman town buried by Vesuvius in 79 CE, archaeologists found a villa containing an entire library of carbonized papyrus scrolls. Many of them are works by Philodemus, an Epicurean philosopher. These scrolls are incredibly fragile. They're basically charcoal. But using advanced imaging techniques, scholars have been able to read them, and they're revealing new details about Epicurean philosophy, practice, and community life. There's also that massive inscription at Winowanda in Turkey that we mentioned earlier, discovered in the 19th century, still being excavated and studied today. A wealthy Epicurean named Diogenes had Epicurean teachings carved on a huge public wall, wanting to share philosophy's benefits with everyone who passed by. 25,000 words of Epicurean philosophy preserved in stone waiting to be read, and in our own time there's been an explosion of interest in Epicurus. Philosophers are reconsidering his ethics, his theory of pleasure, his naturalism. Psychologists are finding parallels between Epicurean practices and modern cognitive behavioral therapy. The happiness studies movement, positive psychology, is rediscovering Epicurean insights about what actually makes people happy. Environmental philosophers are interested in Epicurus's emphasis on simple living and natural limits. Political theorists are reconsidering his critique of political ambition and his vision of alternative communities. There are even modern Epicurean communities, people trying to recreate something like the garden, practicing philosophy together, supporting each other in living simply and wisely. Because here's the thing. The problems Epicurus identified, anxiety about death, fear of divine punishment, endless desire for more, political turmoil, social pressure, these haven't gone away. If anything, they're worse in our hyper-connected, consumer-driven, anxiety-ridden modern world, and Epicurus's solutions, rational examination of fears, wise management of desires, cultivation of deep friendships, simple living, philosophical practice, these are still relevant, maybe more relevant than ever. Before we wrap up, I want to show you something that captures the spirit of Epicureanism better than anything I could say. Around 200 CE, that's about 450 years after Epicurus died, a wealthy man named Diogenes lived in the city of Winowanda in what's now southern Turkey. And Diogenes did something extraordinary. He commissioned a massive stone inscription, a wall 80 meters long, covered with the teachings of Epicurus, 25,000 words carved into stone. The longest ancient Greek inscription ever discovered. Now, think about what this means. This wasn't a temple. This wasn't a monument to Diogenes himself. This was a public service announcement, philosophical wisdom made available to everyone who walked by. Rich or poor, educated or illiterate, citizen or slave, anyone passing through Winowanda could stop and read Epicurean philosophy, for free, forever, and Diogenes explains why he did it. He writes, "Having already reached the sunset of my life, I wanted to use this stoa to advertise publicly the medicines that bring salvation. Medicines that bring salvation. Not religious salvation, philosophical salvation, freedom from fear, freedom from anxiety, the path to tranquility." And he wanted to share it, not hoard it, not sell it, not restrict it to an elite few. He wanted everyone to have access to these life-changing ideas. This is the evangelical spirit of Epicureanism, and I use that word deliberately, evangelical, because Epicureans believed their philosophy could genuinely save people from suffering, and they felt a moral obligation to spread it. Think about the contrast with other ancient philosophies. The Pythagoreans were secretive. You had to be initiated into their mysteries. The Platonists were elitist. Philosophy was for those capable of abstract thought, not the masses. Even the Stoics, for all their universalism, tended to write for educated audiences. But the Epicureans? They wanted to reach everyone. They wrote in accessible language. They welcomed all comers to the garden. They carved their teachings on public walls, because they believed, genuinely believed, that philosophy could transform lives. That understanding the nature of reality could free you from fear. That examining your desires could bring happiness. That friendship and simple living could create genuine flourishing. And they had evidence. They'd seen it work. They'd experienced it themselves. So they spread the word. Through letters, through communities, through public inscriptions, through poetry like Lucretius' masterpiece. And here's what's moving about that wall in Onoanda. It's still there. Partially ruined, yes. Fragments scattered, yes. But archaeologists are still excavating it, still piecing together the inscription, still reading Diogenes' message after 1800 years. The stone endures, the words endure, the ideas endure. Empires have risen and fallen, religions have come and gone, political systems have transformed beyond recognition. But those words carved in stone, "Don't fear the gods, don't fear death, goods are easy to obtain, evils are easy to endure," they're still there, still true. Still offering the same medicine they offered 1800 years ago. This is the power of philosophical truth. It transcends its historical moment because it speaks to something fundamental about human experience. We still fear death. We still struggle with desire. We still seek happiness and flee suffering. And the wisdom that helped people in ancient Onoanda can still help us today. That's what Diogenes understood. That's why he carved those words in stone. Not for his own glory, his name is barely mentioned. Not for profit. It was a gift. Not for a select few. It was public, accessible to all. For the sake of human flourishing. For the sake of reducing suffering. For the sake of sharing wisdom that works. This is philosophy at its best. Not as academic exercise, not as intellectual game-playing, not as status marker, but as medicine for the soul. And the prescription is still valid. Now let's talk about what all of this means for us right now, in our specific historical moment. Because I want to make a case that we need Epicurus more than ever. Our crisis of meaning. We live in a time of profound meaning crisis. Traditional religious frameworks have eroded for many people, but we haven't replaced them with anything coherent. We're left with fragments. Consumer culture, career achievement, social media validation, political tribalism. None of these provide genuine meaning. None of them answer the deep questions. Why am I here? What matters? How should I live? And the result is epidemic anxiety, depression, and what the philosopher Charles Taylor calls the malaise of modernity. This sense of emptiness, purposelessness, disconnection. Epicurus offers something powerful here. A complete framework for meaning-making that doesn't require supernatural beliefs. You matter because you're alive and capable of experiencing pleasure and pain. What matters is reducing suffering and increasing genuine happiness for yourself and others. How you should live is through wisdom, friendship, and simple pleasures. It's not complicated, it's not mystical, it's grounded in your actual experience as a living being. And it works. It provides genuine meaning without requiring you to believe things you can't verify. Our addiction to more. We're also living through a crisis of desire. Consumer capitalism runs on the constant creation of new desires. You're bombarded with messages that you need more stuff, more experiences, more achievement, more status. And it's making us miserable. We work ourselves to exhaustion. We go into debt. We sacrifice relationships and health for career advancement. We're constantly comparing ourselves to others and feeling inadequate. The hedonic treadmill is real. We adapt to whatever we have and want more. Satisfaction is always just out of reach. Epicurus saw this 2,300 years ago. He diagnosed vain and empty desires as the source of most human misery, and he offered a cure. Distinguish necessary from unnecessary desires. Satisfy the necessary ones simply. Moderate the unnecessary ones. Eliminate the vain ones entirely. This is radical in our context. It's countercultural. It's revolutionary. What if you just stopped? Stopped chasing more. Stopped comparing yourself to others. Stopped letting advertisers manipulate your desires. What if you asked before every purchase, every career move, every status-seeking behavior, is this necessary? Will it bring stable pleasure? Or am I just feeding an insatiable desire that will never be satisfied? The simple life Epicurus advocates isn't deprivation, it's liberation. Liberation from debt. Liberation from the anxiety of keeping up. Liberation from the treadmill of endless consumption. And here's the beautiful part, it's also ecologically necessary. We can't sustain current consumption levels. The planet can't handle it. We need to learn to live with less, to find happiness and sufficiency rather than excess. Epicurus shows us how, not through sacrifice and guilt, but through understanding what actually makes us happy, our loneliness epidemic. And finally, we're facing a crisis of connection. Despite being more connected than ever through technology, people report record levels of loneliness. We have hundreds of social media friends, but few deep friendships. We're together but isolated. And this is killing us. Literally. Loneliness is as harmful to health as smoking. It increases risk of depression, anxiety, cardiovascular disease, early death. Epicurus identified friendship as the supreme good, not networking, not social media followers. Deep, genuine friendship based on shared values and mutual support. The garden was built around this insight. It was a community of friends pursuing wisdom together, supporting each other and living well. And we need this. We need spaces, physical or virtual, where we can be authentic, where we can discuss what matters, where we can support each other in living wisely. We need to prioritize friendship over career advancement. We need to invest time in deep relationships rather than superficial socializing. We need communities of practice where we can grow together. This isn't nostalgia for some imagined past. This is a genuine human need that our current culture fails to meet. And Epicurus shows us what it could look like. Communities built around shared philosophical practice, mutual support, simple living, and the cultivation of wisdom. The path forward. So here's what I'm suggesting. Epicurus isn't just historically interesting. He's practically necessary. His philosophy offers meaning without supernaturalism, happiness without consumerism, connection without superficiality, freedom without isolation, pleasure without excess. This is what we need. This is what our moment requires. Not a return to ancient Greece. We can't go back, and we shouldn't want to. But a recovery of ancient wisdom, adapted to our context, applied to our problems. What would a modern garden look like? What would Epicurean practice look like in the 21st century? Maybe it's a group of friends who meet regularly to discuss philosophy and support each other in living wisely. Maybe it's choosing a simpler lifestyle, working less, consuming less, but having more time for friendship and reflection. Maybe it's practicing daily examination of desires and fears, using Epicurean principles as a framework. Maybe it's building communities, online or offline, where people can pursue wisdom together. The specific forms will vary, but the core principles remain. Examine your life rationally. Distinguish necessary from unnecessary desires. Cultivate deep friendships. Live simply. Practice philosophy daily. Seek tranquility, not excitement. This is the legacy Epicurus offers us. Not a museum piece, but a living philosophy that can genuinely improve lives. The question is, will we accept it? So let's bring this home. Let's talk about what Epicurus ultimately offers you. Not humanity in general, not some abstract audience, but you, right now, in your actual life. An invitation to freedom. Epicurus is inviting you to be free. Free from fears that have no basis in reality. Free from desires that can never be satisfied. Free from the anxiety of constantly seeking more. free from dependence on things beyond your control. This freedom isn't granted by external circumstances. It's not something you achieve when you get the right job, the right relationship, the right amount of money. It's something you practice right now, today. You can examine a fear right now and ask, is this rational? What's the worst that could happen? Would that actually harm me the way I imagine? You can look at a desire right now and ask, is this necessary? Will satisfying it bring stable pleasure, or will it create new anxieties? You can reach out to a friend right now and invest in that relationship. You can appreciate a simple pleasure right now, the taste of water when you're thirsty, the warmth of sunlight, the satisfaction of a task completed. The philosophical life begins whenever you choose to begin it. An invitation to depth. Epicurus is also inviting you to depth. In a culture of superficiality, shallow entertainment, superficial relationships, surface-level thinking, he's offering something profound. The examined life, the life of wisdom, the life of genuine friendship and meaningful conversation. This isn't easy. It requires effort. It requires courage to go against cultural currents. It requires discipline to practice daily. But the rewards are real. Deeper happiness, more meaningful relationships, greater peace of mind, genuine flourishing. And here's what's beautiful. This depth is available to everyone. You don't need to be brilliant. You don't need special training. You don't need wealth or status. You need curiosity about how to live well. You need honesty in examining yourself. You need commitment to practice. That's it. That's the price of admission to the philosophical life. An invitation to community. And finally, Epicurus is inviting you to community. Not the isolated individualism of modern life. Not the superficial socializing of consumer culture, but genuine community built around shared values and mutual support. You can't do this alone. The philosophical life requires friends who share your commitment to wisdom, who will challenge you when you're rationalizing, who will support you when you're struggling, who will celebrate with you when you make progress. The garden wasn't just Epicurus teaching students. It was a community of friends pursuing wisdom together. And you can create that. Maybe not a literal garden, but a community of practice. A group of friends committed to examining their lives, supporting each other, living wisely. This is what's missing in modern life. Not more information, not more techniques, but genuine community around what matters most. The final word. Let me end with this. Epicurus lived over 2,300 years ago. He died in pain, surrounded by friends, calling it a happy day because of the philosophical conversations he'd shared. His body dispersed into atoms. His garden was eventually destroyed. Most of his writings were lost. But his ideas? They're still here. Still true. Still offering the same medicine they offered in ancient Athens. Don't fear the gods. Don't fear death. Goods are easy to obtain. Evils are easy to endure. Examine your desires, cultivate friendship, live simply, practice wisdom, seek tranquility. This isn't just ancient history, this isn't just philosophical theory, this is a path to genuine human flourishing, tested by thousands of practitioners over thousands of years, validated by modern psychology, urgently relevant to our contemporary crisis. The question isn't whether Epicurus's philosophy works. The evidence is clear that it does. The question is, will you practice it? Will you examine your fears and discover they're groundless? Will you examine your desires and discover most of them are unnecessary? Will you invest in deep friendships rather than superficial connections? Will you choose simple pleasures over expensive distractions? Will you cultivate wisdom rather than accumulate possessions? Will you seek tranquility rather than excitement? This is the invitation. This is what Epicurus offers across the centuries. Not a doctrine to believe, not a theory to memorize, but a practice to live. A practice that can genuinely transform your life. That can free you from anxiety. That can bring deeper happiness. That can create meaningful community. The garden is still open. The inscription still stands. The medicine is still available. All you have to do is accept the invitation. All you have to do is begin. And the time to begin is now. Not someday when you're ready. Not when circumstances are perfect. Not when you figured everything out. Now. This moment, this breath, this choice. The philosophical life, the life of wisdom, friendship, and tranquility, is waiting for you. Will you enter the garden? And that, my friends, is Epicurus. A philosopher who believed that ordinary people, through reason and friendship, could achieve genuine happiness, who built a community around that belief, whose ideas have survived 2,300 years because they speak to something fundamental about human experience. I hope this lecture has given you not just information about Epicurus, but inspiration to examine your own life, to question your fears, to examine your desires, to invest in friendship, to seek tranquility, because that's what philosophy is really about. Not just understanding ideas, but using those ideas to live better. Thank you.